So here we are back at our register form, and what we're going to try to do this time around is write some JavaScript that will validate the information that users enter into this form. We want to make sure that they enter all of the required information, and we also want to ensure that they enter it in the correct format. So we're going to do this two different ways. The first time through, which is what we're doing in this lecture, we'll write some straight JavaScript ourselves that does form validation. The next time, which will take place in the next lecture, we're going to simplify our lives by using a package called jQuery. So let's have a look at the HTML that exists for this form right now. So I'm going to go back to my Atom editor, and here is our form. It appears to be all right, but if you were paying attention, you may have realized that we actually left some required attributes out of the inputs on this form. Let's have a look at the first one. So the very first input on this form is a type of text. It has a class of form control, its ID is first name, and its placeholder is first name. But there's one required attribute that's not on this input, or in fact on any of the inputs on this form, and that is the name. If we don't give our inputs a name attribute, the information that the user enters will never ever get entered into the server. The server won't get the information, it can't process it. So what we did initially was just copy the example from the Bootstrap page, and unfortunately the Bootstrap authors decided not to put the name attribute in there. So we're going to put it in. Now I'm actually going to break this input into two lines so it's a little cleaner and we can see what we're typing. And I'm going to give this its name attribute, which goes in the following format. Name equals, and then whatever I want to call my attribute. And I'm going to call my attribute the same as the ID. And I just find that's a useful convention that makes it easier for me to figure out what's what when I'm writing JavaScript code. So the name is first name. And I'll do the same thing down below for the next input. And this one has an ID of last name, so following our convention, let's call it name equals last name. And down to the next one, which is called email, so its ID is actually username and its type is email. So let's hit return, get a new line, name equals username. And on the next one, which is verify username, we'll give it a name equals verify username. And the next one is password, so we'll do exactly the same thing, name equals password. And the next one is verify password. So we'll give it a name equals verify password. Great, that's done. Now there's one more thing we need to do before we can go much further. And it's not immediately apparent to you because it appears that we've done everything right. But to show you what I'm talking about, let's go back to our web browser and I'm going to reload this page. Now it appears that everything is absolutely perfect, but it's not. If you're using Chrome like I am, and you go to the top right-hand corner of your browser, you'll see this little hamburger menu, it's called. I click on that, and I find more tools, and then I choose Developer Tools. Okay? And that will pop up a little window that gives me a console. And you'll notice there's a line in red in my console right now, and it says, uncaught error, Bootstrap's JavaScript requires jQuery. So, what is that? Well, I'm going to close this window, go back to my HTML file, and scroll to the very bottom. And you'll notice when we set up our default template a few lectures ago, we added this line at the very bottom. Script, source equals, and then the path to Bootstrap's JavaScript. Well, as that error on the previous screen showed us, Bootstrap's JavaScript actually requires a library called jQuery. Now, to be clear, we're not going to use jQuery in this lesson, but we need that JavaScript error to go away. So let's get jQuery, and that's a pretty simple process. So back to my web browser, I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to go to jQuery.com. That brings me to this page. I'm going to click on the Download jQuery button, but as was the case when we got Bootstrap, I'm not going to bother downloading it. Instead, I'll go to their content delivery network, their CDN. And if you scroll partway down the page, you'll see these two lines. And it's right under jQuery CDN provided by MaxCDN. So I'm going to copy those two lines, then I'm going to switch back to my Atom editor, and before the line where I include Bootstrap's JavaScript, I'm going to paste in those 2 lines I just copied, and I need to make one change to them, and I'll explain it to you now. You'll notice at the top of this first line when it says script source equals / code jQuery.com. That's actually a shorthand, and it's a broken URL. It's only a problem because we're not actually running this code on a server. In a few lectures, after we've installed Vagrant and have a virtual server running on our machines, that won't be a problem. But right now, I need to put something in front of that so that a file loaded locally into a web browser will actually be able to access this code. And it's pretty simple. It's the same thing that's in the third example from Bootstrap. I just put https:/, and I put the same thing on the next line, https:/, and save that. And I'm going to switch back to my web browser, go back to my tab that has the register page, and I'm going to open those developer tools. So I go to the hamburger menu, choose More Tools, Developer Tools, and the error is right there because I haven't reloaded the page yet. But now when I reload the page, that error goes away, and everything works the way that it's supposed to. So, time to start thinking about how we're going to write some JavaScript. Well, we already know how to write a function, and we already know how to pop up an alert. So let's think through what we're trying to do here. And we'll start with the very first field. I want, when the user enters the information on this form, I want first name to be a required field. So they type something in here, they click register, fine. But if they don't type something in here, and then they click register, we want to pop up an alert that says first name is required. How might we do that? Well, let's go back to our Atom editor and find out. So if we think about what we're trying to do here, what we're going to have to do is write some JavaScript code. So we know that at the very bottom of the page, this is where we put our JavaScript code. We're going to have an opening script tag and a closing script tag. And we want to write a function that validates data. So why don't we call the function validate? Function validate. Now right now, there's a perfectly valid JavaScript function. If I save this and go back and reload it in the browser, there'll be no errors. But our function isn't doing anything, and it's not being called. So what we need to do now is figure out how are we going to have this validate function called when the user clicks the submit button at the bottom of the page. Well, there's actually an attribute we can put on the form that says onSubmit equals validate. But that's not quite right. We actually don't want to just validate the form. We want to call that function at the bottom of the page and return true if the form is okay, and then let the form submit. Or return false if the form is not okay, and display an alert instead. So to make that happen, we're going to put the word return in front of this. Okay, so far so good. Let's go to the very bottom and try this out. Well, our function doesn't do anything yet. It's not returning any value whatsoever. So let's just try this. Let's try return equals, or return false. So all I'm doing, every time this function is called, it's going to return false. Well, what should happen then? Well, logically, if we go back up and look at how this is being called, on submit, which means when the user clicks the submit button, we're going to run the function validate and get a true or a false back. So if we get a false, this form should not submit. Let's save this, switch back to our web browser, reload the page to make sure we have the latest version, and I'm just going to click register. Now what should happen is the form should not submit. And the way I can tell the form is not going to submit is it will not change the URL up here to add a question mark after it. Remember, if we return a form that does nothing, one that uses the get form anyway, it will reload the page like this with a question mark. Well, let's see what happens. I click register and nothing happens. That's exactly what I wanted to see. There's no value being returned. Let's open our developer console to see if there's any kind of error. No JavaScript errors, so it looks like it's doing exactly what I want. Perfect. Now instead, if I come back down to the bottom of this page and return true, and then switch back to my web browser, reload it, what should happen when I click on the register button now is this URL at the top of the page should get a question mark after it. Because we're returning true, it's okay to submit the form. And it does, but notice now how it's put the question mark and all of the named attributes that we have in our form. They're all there, and they all have nothing after them. So let's look at this. First name equals nothing, because nothing was entered. Last name equals nothing. Nothing was entered. All of the form values are separated by an ampersand. So this is great. This logic should work for us. And what we need to do now is go back to our source code and do more than just return true or false. So how are we going to do this? Well, we need to be able to look at our form values, and we need to be able to test them and see if they have something. So what we're doing is basically saying, if first name is not empty, then return true, else return false. Now that's pseudocode, that's certainly not valid JavaScript, but that's what we want to do. We want to check the value of first name, make sure there's something in there. If there is something in there, return true, otherwise return false. Okay, let's delete that pseudocode and actually write some valid JavaScript code. So we're writing our first if statement ever, and JavaScript if follows a pretty basic syntax. You have if followed by parentheses, and then in parentheses what you're trying to test for. And here we're going to look at our document. We're going to look at the register form on that document, which is the name of that form, and we're going to look for first name, and we're going to get its value. If its value is equal, and it's a double equal sign to verify that things are equal in JavaScript, if it's equal to nothing, that means the user didn't type anything in. Then we have curly braces to separate things. So if it's equal to nothing, we want to present an alert, and we already know how to do that. Alert, you must enter a first name. And then we want to return false. And that gets us out of this. No other logic will get executed. False is immediately returned to the browser. So we have document register form. That's the name of our form, or it should be. Let's verify that our form has a name. Form name equals register's name, class equals form horizontal. Yes, it's got a name. Perfect. So that's what we're going to do. So this only returns false. Otherwise, we want to return true. So if we get past this if statement, if document register form first name has some value, it's going to not execute the code that's here. Instead, it moves to the next code, which is return true. So let's try this out. We'll save it, go back to our web browser, and reload the page. Okay, I'm going to reload the page after deleting all these parameters so we know that we're getting something of value. And now I have nothing here, nothing in my form whatsoever. So if I come down and click register, what should happen is that submit gets caught by the form handler that says onSubmit equals validate or return validate, and it should pop a dialog saying, please enter your first name. Let's give it a try. You must enter a first name. Great. But now if I put a value in there, so I put in John, and I register, it should submit the form. It's not going to do anything, but our URL at the top will change so we know the form gets successfully submitted. Let's give it a try. And it does exactly what we want. Now we could do this for every one of these form elements, but I think you've got an idea of how basic validation can be handled with straight JavaScript. Let's go on and instead see a way it can be done much more efficiently and much more elegantly using jQuery. And we'll handle that next time.